Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Today we are in Katowice at the European Economic Congress, and I'm joined by Mariusz Ustyjańczuk, partner and defense sector lead for Poland and Central Europe. Hello and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
So there are a lot of things when it comes to defense that are absolutely key at the current time. Obviously, there is a lot of volatility. There is a lot of unpredictability when it comes to defense. I'd like to start with Poland because Donald Tusk definitely brought a lot of attention to his person with his speech last week. He's put a lot of focus on Poland first. And there's a lot going on in Poland's manufacturing industry. So I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were in terms of what is happening with Poland's manufacturing industry and what you think is going to happen for Poland's defense industry in terms of local content over the next year or so, keeping in mind that Poland is very keen to spend 5%, maybe a little bit more, or maybe it's going to keep it at 5% over the nearest period or so.
Okay, thank you for this question. First of all, it's important to have a context, on the Poland spendings on defense over the last 10 years. And we've been around 2% of GDP. And after Russian invasion on Ukraine in 2022, our expenditures increased significantly to 3.8% of GDP and last year and 4.7% this year. Which translates to huge amount, because this means we calculated that over the next 11 years, Poland will spend almost 2 trillion Polish zlotys, which is about 500 billion US dollars. The amount that we have never been spending, and this is like first of a kind situation. So now,
we're leading the way in the region and in Europe.
Of course, and Poland is the biggest spender among all the NATO countries because we spend the most GDP percentage-wise, of course. And this trend will continue over the next 10 years at least, because now when we make these acquisitions, we buy armament, then somebody will need to maintain them, overhaul them. The capacity of Polish army will increase. So basically, the level of spending will remain at least 4% over the next 10 years. And now we need to make sure that this has also positive impact on our economy, because the worst we could do, we could just spend this 2 trillion zlotys, acquiring equipment from outside, but this would have zero positive impact on Polish economy. So, referring to Prime Minister Tusk's statements from last year, we need to make sure that at least, I would say, 50% of this amount will be spent with the Polish companies or the companies that will or are operating in Poland and producing in Poland.
But what do you think that actually means for the industries, the revival of Polish industries that have been actually suffering over the last few years very much?
Well, this is probably the biggest question, whether the industry is ready to get this amount of money. Because I think now we have a consensus that we will spend this money, and everybody is concerned about the security of the country and of our region. So there is consent that we will spend this money. The money is, I would say, granted, either from the GP or from European funds or outside. But whether the industry is ready to absorb this amount of money, I'm not sure, and this will require significant transformation of the industry. That would also imply the partnership, joint ventures, transfer of technology, local content that we will need to have and will need to produce in Poland, mainly and primarily for our domestic own purposes to ensure the security of our region and resilience of our region, but also at some point also to maybe export those capabilities outside.
And how do you contrast that with the information that was released in the IMF World Economic Report yesterday that actually downgraded Poland's economic growth? I think it's actually gone down to 3.2%. It was almost over 4%, I think, at the beginning of this year. Very, very positive growth, and now it's going down. So I don't know whether you could perhaps comment on what this actually means in the long run. Perhaps you could contrast it with Prime Minister Tusk's outlook for the economy and this defense spending with what was released in the economic report yesterday, because it doesn't look too good, essentially.
Well, we can say it doesn't look too good, but if you look, 10 years back,
it could be worse.
It was bad. Now it's, I would say, better for the industry, and because we have traction and we have consensus that we want to develop this way and we want to build our own domestic defense and deterrence capabilities. So I don't think that it's that bad. I
Well,
think
it's gone from 3.8, I think, or almost with suggestions that we might actually go over 4 to 3.2. And I suppose what I'm asking you is, this contrast of certainty of growth, very significant growth, down to 3.2, with a lot of expenditure ahead of us.
Well, we'll need to find the money. And there are a couple of sources, obviously. Majority of this expenditures comes from debt. So, our children, grandchildren will be impacted by the decisions and the investment that we're making now in defense in particular. There will need to be shifts, and we'll need to finance this area from other domains most probably, because this was underinvested for many years, and now we need to speed up and find this money. Or we need to invite and involve private capital as well, more. Private, domestic, but also international European capital as well. And there are certain mechanisms already, both credit and debt mechanisms that we could tap in, and we should be using them all.
So you think all the mechanisms that are available should be utilized, or do you think that there is one way better than perhaps the others that are available?
I think we should consider all, but also understand whether this is real money or this is like cheap debt, because some of this, as I said, will have long-term impact on the future generations. But I think we should be tapping into all the sources available.
And in terms of the green transition, which is also very high up on the agenda in the EU and obviously in Poland as well, for the current government, it's also very much a priority. Do you think that gets in the way of developing Poland's defense and manufacturing?
I would say it's not either or. We need to do both. We cannot forget the green transition. And I know that and I observe that the atmosphere around going to green, especially on the other side of the Atlantic, is changing. But we cannot forget that, because this also has huge impact on our future generations.
So you think it's not at risk of being forgotten or sidelined in light of all the geopolitical tensions that we're facing at the moment?
Well, I would say, if you ask about me personally,
absolutely,
I don't think it's either or. We should get engaged in both. Probably this will require some
so implementing both strategies, you think, is no problem? One strategy doesn't get in the way of the other.
Well, of course, it will be difficult, especially with the economic outlook that you mentioned. But I think we cannot just forget what we're standing behind for past number of years, and we should continue both.
And I wanted to also ask, how do you think that the geopolitical tensions we are facing now might, or perhaps do, get in the way of sourcing the critical equipment that we need for developing and manufacturing the defense that Poland needs, or perhaps our region needs, or even going further, Europe needs at the moment?
I think first reactions to U.S. administration statements that Europe needs to defend themselves or be capable of defending themselves were negative, but I think now we see more and more positive in that, because we have a trigger, or we got a trigger to get moving ourselves, and I think in a long term the result of this tensions, as you said, or these expectations that Europe should be self-sufficient or capable of defending themselves will pay off and will actually be a benefit for us, both in terms of deterrence and defense capabilities, but also in terms of defense industry capabilities that we will need to develop faster in Poland and in Europe.
So in your opinion, the efforts that the Polish government is making at the moment in terms of the investment and in terms of the manufacturing, that this is heading in the right way, is that your understanding?
I think if the question is whether we should move more and more defense industry capabilities into Poland and into region, I think that's the right direction. But we will not limit the partnerships with US, with Korea, with other important international global players, because we need to develop technology or have access to technology that we might not have at the moment ourselves.
What do you think is getting in the way of developing and accessing that technology at the moment?
It takes a lot of time, and there are certain defense capabilities that we need to build or strengthen very quickly, and this requires using the technology that is available, probably more costly, and using that will have limited impact on our economies. But in the longer term, we should be able to develop these technologies and capabilities ourselves.
And in terms of, if you were to grade the priorities for developing and expanding our, maybe let's not go into the military area, but in terms of just defense itself, what would you consider to be the utmost priority at the moment?
As Poland, we are still very well connected and dependent on NATO, but at the same time we acknowledge that we may want to build our defense capabilities ourselves, having NATO behind, and NATO will remain to be our important partner in that space. Still, we should be able to be strong ourselves, being a frontline country. I'm not able to comment in which military domain we should put more money in, because I think that's too complex question for this short conversation. But I think we should put an emphasis on strengthening our independence, still having NATO as important supporter of our defense capabilities.
And this brings us to the end of World Talks here in Katowice. I was joined by Mariusz Ustyjańczuk, partner and defense sector lead for Poland and Central Europe.